my new Strawberry Fields quilt pattern. And, just don't judge. I haven't done the binding yet. I'll get to it. But I didn't want you to have to wait for me to do that part. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make the block so you can make this quilt. The pattern is available on my website, or you can click right here to get the link to go right to the pattern. I'm going to show you how to make this cute flower block. And then we're going to do another video and I'm going to show you how to make the strawberry.
If you are sewing along with me today, I would love to see the blocks that you make, but I want to remind you just to follow along with your pattern, especially for the flower block, to make sure you're using the right size pieces. Now, the first block we're going to make within the strawberry block are the four corner blocks. And so we're going to start by laying the little blue squares on the corners. Now you want to do this for each one. And you can either use your ruler and draw from corner to corner. You want to draw a diagonal down the middle of that little blue square, okay? Or you can use seam tape, which I have on my machine. I'm going to show you how I do that as well. Either way will work. It's totally up to you. There is no right or wrong way. So here I have lined up the block in the corner, okay? This is called snowballing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch right along that line, or if I was using the seam tape, I'm going to follow the guidelines on the tape. Now we're going to spin that around and do the same thing on the other side. Just stitch right along that line. Now, I prefer to work in batches. It helps me get my blocks done quicker. So I'm going to take all of the corner blocks and I'm going to add the blue squares in the corners for all of them before I move on to the next step. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to trim these. So I'm using my 1/4 inch ruler and I am lining that up with the seam. So I'm leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance on every corner that I'm cutting off. So there's a 1/4 inch there, and then I'm going to line this ruler up. That blue edge is lined up with the stitching. And so there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all of these. So you're going to go ahead and trim all of these off, and then we'll move along to adding the pink square. Once we are done trimming those up, we're going to add that pink square in the same manner. So we're going to add it down in the bottom corner. We're going to line up those raw edges and draw a line from corner to corner, or you can use your seam tape if you prefer, whichever way, again, works best for you, because there's no rules here. Okay, next go back to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all of these little squares on our block along that diagonal line that we just drew, or using our seam allowance tape to make sure we're sewing that on straight. Then we're going to use the same process and we're going to trim all of those little corners off. Okay, once we are done trimming off those corners, we're going to just press all of these open and we're going to essentially have a square once again, once we press those corners open. So go ahead, take all of those blocks that you've prepared and press them open. If you want to use starch or steam or water, whatever works best for you is totally fine here. You want to have nice, crisp, flat seams. And next, you're going to add the little outside border on all of the corners of these blocks, and then we'll be done with the corner blocks. You want to be sure to start with the shorter strip first and sew that along the top edge, and make sure you're sewing the right way because part of these will go one direction, part will go the other, because these are the four corners that go around the outside edge of this block. So make sure you're looking at your pattern to ensure that you're sewing them on the right direction. So we've got our strips along the top, and then we're going to press those down before we add the strips along the sides. So you should have two going one way, two going the other, depending on how many blocks you're making at once. Right now, I'm just showing one, so that's why I have two of each. If you were doing the entire quilt, you'll have more of each one. Once you're done pressing, I like to lay out my blocks to make sure I'm putting each strip on the correct side and that the pink part of the block is towards the inside because that is the inner circle of the flower. So we're going to go ahead and just sew those in place along each side. And then to finish up this part of the block, we're going to press those open and set them aside. All right, next we're going to make the center of the flower. So this is the center block, and we're going to snowball all four corners with our pink pieces here. So we're going to place them on the corners, and again, you can draw from corner to Doesn't matter corner, which or corner you you can use start your in. seam Just make tape. sure you match up the raw edges and that your corners are nice and even, and just stitch from one point down to the other. You're going to repeat that for all three of these little squares. Once you are done sewing them in place, use your ruler and go ahead and trim off that excess. Be sure to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all four seams. And then go ahead and take this to your ironing station and press those corners open. All right, it's time to make the last four pieces for this block. So you're going to take your remaining pieces as shown in the pattern and you're going to lay them out. Now I'm going to start by sewing the pink one onto the white one first. So we're going to sew all four of those in place. And then you're going to want to take those to your ironing board and just simply press those open. Once we've got those all pressed open, we're going to snowball all of the corners. So I like to start with the right side on all of my blocks first. Again, place that block in the corner there and draw from corner to corner, or again, use your seam tape, whichever works best for you, as long as you're sewing a straight line from corner to corner. That's all that matters. Now, for snowballing to work properly, it is important to have a nice straight seam. So slow down your stitching if need to. If you do mess up and your seam is really off, I would take that apart and restitch it just because you're going to have better results if these seams are nice and straight. We're going to go ahead and trim off all four of these, leaving again a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So trim those and then we're going to press those open. Make sure your seam when you press it open is nice and crisp and laying really flat before we move on to the next part. Okay, now we're gonna apply the right side of the snowball with the same method. So draw that line from corner to corner, place that in the upper right corner, and you're gonna stitch in place and repeat this for all of these blocks. All that's left to do is to trim these off and then press them open. Make sure you leave that 1/4 inch seam allowance again for all of these. That's why I really love this ruler because it's got that nice 1/4 inch line very clearly marked. So go ahead, press them all open. If you want to use starch or steam to make sure they're nice and crisp, you can do that. So now it is time to lay this out. So we're going to have 3 rows of 3. Okay, so we're going to have our corner blocks in each corner. Now you want to make sure all of your pink is going towards the inside. So lay this out and you can follow along with the diagram inside your pattern. Everything is there for you to follow along with as well. And now we're going to sew 1, 2, and 3 rows. So I just start at the top and I sew the top row together and then I sew the middle row and then the bottom. I like to open them up as I go along just to make sure that my corners are all matching, my seams are where they need to be. Continue sewing until all three of your rows are sewn together. Now that we've got all three sewn together, we want to press our seams in opposite directions so that we can nest the seams when we line up the rows to put the block together. So for the top and bottom row, I'm going to press those seams towards the outside. And for that middle row, I'm going to press the two seams towards the inside. That will make sure that when I line these rows up and start putting them together and I'm matching the seams here, the intersections will nest nicely together because one seam is going to the left and the other is going to the right, which allows the two seams to lay nicely right one inside the other. So I'm going to add a pin there and then I'm going to add another pin at the other intersection to keep them where I want them when I'm sewing the rows together. So I'm going to pin these two pieces. Then I'm going to bring them to the sewing machine. I'm going to stitch all the way down. Be sure to remove those pins as you go. And then we are going to do the same thing for the top piece. Once you get those seams nested all nice, go ahead and sew the last two pieces together. And this will be block number 1. We've got our first flower block all finished up. That went together so well. I just love how these look.
I hope you enjoyed the tutorial on the flower block. Now keep in mind, this would make such a fun pattern to do like a summer table runner. I have this idea for changing up all the flower petals to make different color flowers. You can change it up whatever way you want. You can use a solid as the background. I chose this blue with the little tiny polka dots just for some added fun, but there's so many different things you can do. Be sure to watch this next video right here, and I'm going to show you how to make the strawberry block.